Thank you for coming back for our last speaker of day 2. And to introduce him, we have Cadet Andrew White.
Good afternoon. My name is Cadet 4th Class Andrew White, and I'm a freshman at the Air Force Academy from Hereford, Texas. I'm looking to major in computer network security, and our speaker for today is Lieutenant General Bill Bender, who is a Chief Information Officer and Chief of Information Dominance for the Secretary of the Air Force. General Bender directly supports 54,000 cyber operations worldwide with a portfolio evaluated at $17 billion. Prior to entering the cyber field, General Bender was a command pilot with over 4,000 hours on nearly a dozen different aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant General Bill Bender.
Thank you. Okay, well, thanks everybody for the opportunity to meet with you late in the afternoon here. I understand I am the last speaker for the day, which is something that I know you're all looking forward to. There's some floor time after, and it's always a great opportunity to have an audience like this that is really interested in the subjects that we're going to cover. I wanted to start by thanking the cadet who's already disappeared off the stage. He had one Freudian slip in there, and he said our portfolio is $17,000, so that should have everybody running from the room. Anyhow, I am really happy to be with you today. Look forward to the conversation. I want to start, as the other speakers have this morning, by thanking AFCEA and in particular the Rocky Mountain chapter for putting together such a great symposium. I did not have an opportunity to be with you yesterday, but coming out late last night and then spending the better part of the day here, clearly it's a professional symposium, professional conference. And the richness of this has been in all the conversations, and that side of it has been great. I think if I can also thank all of the sponsors and reflect on some of the theme of the day in terms of partnership. There's never been a time in my career or in this Air Force of ours where we rely more on partnership. And it starts with things like this in terms of the sponsorship that has been present here today in terms of some of our corporate sponsors. And just by your presence here, we're very, very appreciative of the opportunity to talk some of these very challenging times in front of us and together think through how are we going to get after some of the solutions to the problems in front of us. I did want to start, just give you a little bit of a background as to how it is that I came here. You may know that I'm fairly new to my job relatively, though that is quickly becoming something that I'm not allowed to talk about. But I'm in the job about 5 months, and I'm going to share with you some broad brush observations and then dig a little bit deeper into something that we're doing that I think fits nicely where this group is concerned. And I'll get to that, but I'm aware of the fact that I maybe wasn't the first choice. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion yesterday, and I know today because I've been listening to it, a lot of looking at the joint aspects of what we're doing. General Allardyce this morning talked about the importance of the joint warfighter. At lunch, we heard all about JIE, and there was a joint aspect to that. I know when the event organizers and the planners started talking about this, it was like, we need to bring in a CIO. They're looking for, with deference to my brethren across the joint community, they're looking for the CIO that has sort of deep knowledge of joint and the ability to, kind of describe for this audience exactly what we mean when we talk joint solutions. Unfortunately, they were turned down. And then I think the fallback was, let's get somebody up here who at least is a good public speaker and can articulate the importance of the environment we find ourselves in, and unfortunately they were turned down. And then I get a call and they're looking for the best looking CIO, and I gladly accepted. I just really didn't have the heart to turn them down a third time. And so I am glad to be here with an opportunity to share some observations with you. Let me try to kind of burn through the first three. These are what I call lines of effort. In fact, it was Bob Allardyce, who I've had a previous experience with, who recommended, as I came to this job, he goes, take time, observe, but also make the effort for the people who work for you to, kind of come up with, and I think it was his words, campaign plan, but basically I take it to be lines of effort. This is the work after the sum total of all observations and discovery that we need to be focused on. And I owe it to the workforce primarily to do that, but I think it's also beneficial for all of you to know, and I think it will maybe seed some of your discussions in the Q&A. 4 lines of effort. General Hyten spoke extensively about JIE and the importance. Actually, most of what we're doing in the IT business writ large is predicated on the success of that program. And I would never stand in front of you saying that I have ownership of that, but certainly I'm a full-fledged partner in that up at the Air Staff within my organization. And so getting our arms around exactly what that means, where are the roles and responsibilities as we go forward, and in particular where I sit, what work are we doing in an action way to drive JIE to a successful outcome over a period of years. Of course, fundamentally or foundational to that effort is the funding. And I don't think anybody has a more important role in terms of that whole partnership than we do at the Air Staff, because it's a non-program of record and we have to go in and convince our Air Force of the importance of the effort. And we're doing good work there, and I stand before you very confident that JIE is on the right track. It's got the right leadership involvement, it's got the right shared vision, and we're working that. And I think there's some areas that maybe we can go into on the, in terms of specific roles that we play within the CIOA 6 arena to support that effort. A second area is with JIE and Cyber Mission Force, again, talked about extensively over lunch and then referenced pretty extensively this morning, is the notion that for us, this is a complete and total transformation of the workforce. We can't disregard the fact that we're still in a hot fight. The work that we're doing is not going to go away, and about 85% of our workforce is dedicated to the Air Force mission in a way that basically we could quantify as the legacy comms piece of it, and that runs the gamut. But there's a tactical delivery of communications capabilities that is absolutely foundational to the warfight, and we can't let our eye off the target there. But it's a building the airplane on the fly discussion, because at the same time as as JIE allows us to repurpose airmen toward the cyber operations future, we have to have all of the groundwork in place, and that's the training, the education, the thoughtful approach to how are we going to develop a career field through. And frankly, it's the area that in my time, the last number of months out on the road and observing and discovering, it's the area that I get the most questions because it involves people. And when I sat down with General Wells just a couple of days ago to give him an update on how things are going, and I laid in front of him 2 columns. One was after 5 months, what's working, and what's not working or where we need to put a lot more effort. The one that I said is perhaps the most challenging is the transformation of the entire workforce, and he agreed. So we have a shared concern there. A lot of work being done, but it has to have a thoughtful strategy and an enterprise view on how that's going to go. And I've got, my folks have a lot of work in front of us as the senior functional authority for taking that on. A third piece that's going to get a lot of attention, and I learned this primarily from industry because in many ways you've done this, you've done it on a similar scale and scope in working these transformations, but you've done it in a manner that's been pretty responsive relatively and gotten on with it, and in some cases already seen it through. And of course, it's an evolution and it continues, but a lot of work has been done. And I say, well, what's the difference? And part of that is a very strong CIO role. And it's the policy and the guidance that can support and hold accountable the Air Force across the enterprise for doing the tough work that we're trying to do. And we, no bad people here, no real, nothing that I can point to that we necessarily did wrong, but the times that we're in today are demanding of a very prominent, a very value-added proposition where it comes to CIO. And so working very hard to turn that culture primarily within my organization and across the air staff to recognize the importance to the institution of getting that right. I can tell you when I came to the job, the Secretary of the Air Force, the Chief of Staff, they wanted to talk about that, and they recognized the need, and they have charged me with doing that. The challenge has been culturally, we're not used to that as a service, and so we have a little work. So those three things are all interrelated, with the fourth that I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into, and that initiative has to do with a stand-up of a cyber security task force. It is something based on a lot of observations, and if I can kind of knit that for you a little bit more, I'd like to give credit where it's due. I was in central New Jersey and spent some time with AT&T. One of the premises for everything we do going forward is the notion that the cyberspace domain, the cyber domain, is an operational domain. And I tell young audiences, especially the airmen, that if they have any question of that, they should have been with me at AT&T when we look at the most well-developed global network operations center that I have ever seen, and it's certainly on par or maybe even some magnitude better and more advanced than what we would have at Central Command within our CAOC to run the war. And it's a recognition that, in fact, this is a war, and it's an operational domain, and you have to be watching it, you have to be thoughtful, and you have to have a good understanding of what we're talking about there. So I was really pleased when their chief of security, a guy named Ed Amoroso, he's, I think, in some circles well known, but Ed gave me just a couple of hours of his time, and we had a thoughtful discussion. And if I can take you, it was very formative, and that's why I want to bring it up. Take the boundary layer that we all tell our bosses, we're good, we're protected. We've now, sort of, in our case, the Air Force Gateway, it's well defended. It's kind of this impenetrable perimeter, and it's in great shape. And then Ed, kind of shows the attack coming in from the side, and it bounces off, and that's a great pictorial, and we should all feel good, especially when we talk to the board members, because they want to know that we're protected and we're doing all the right things. But you dig a little deeper, and it's been, referred to a number of times today, but for me, kind of coming into it, it helped me understand. It's the the webmail and the web traffic and the VPN and the mobility and the smart devices and the firewall exceptions. And it's the friendly fire if you consider an insider attack or maybe just blatant violations of the rule sets that are in place or maybe just misconfigurations. It's all the third-party vendors and the services that we have. It's the applications and the domain connections. And pretty soon, that hardened boundary or perimeter is looking more like Swiss cheese. And he described it as a police tape, that the only thing it does at this point is keeps the good guys out. It doesn't keep the bad guys out. And, you know, it was a good sort of start to the conversation, and it got me thinking that there's so much more than just that, you know, and this is totally unscientific, but that's about 20%. The other 80% of the concern that we should have is everything else that either touches that network at some point and or has a microchip in it or a programmable logic computer or you name it. It's the other 80%, it's our weapon systems. And they are also at risk. And in the Air Force, my observation is that there's a ton of work being done in these areas, but all of that is sort of disconnected. It's in stovepipes of excellence all over the Air Force. And there's no coherent enterprise view of what we're going to do about that. And so when I think about that in terms of, now I've got a boundary that we're doing really well, by the way. Ed Wilson and his team, I would submit, are leading the way for the DoD. A lot of the concepts in operationalizing the networks, both on the offense and defense, are some of the same methodologies that are now, you know, finding their way into the other services. And so it's not that we're not doing great work, but it's a subset of the larger problem. And it's an area where we need this enterprise view. And it's a wide net to the point that Bob Allardyce shared with you this morning in terms of how many of us are involved in this. And so across the Air Force enterprise, the requirement to get the enterprise view means taking a concerted effort to work together to get after what I would very simply say is problem definition or a diagnosis of the problem. You can't have a strategy until you know the problem that you're trying to solve. That's an oversimplification, but I think it's fair to say that it's work that needs to be done that hasn't been done to the level that we need. And we could probably, you know, put on one of the tables up front here and collapse under the weight of all the reports that have been done. So it's not a matter of delivering a report at the end of this thing, giving it to somebody. It's really going to the chief and to the secretary with a risk mitigation strategy that accounts for all of the problems that we found in a prioritized fashion. What are we going to do to get after the problem? Secondarily, and I think it's important, is an investment strategy. You know, if you only have $1, how are we going to spend it? And it was interesting to have a discussion today with APL, and they've done a fair amount of work to understand investment. How do you spend the dollars that you have wisely? And Lord knows we're in that position. There is no more money, there is no more manpower. Now we have to think. And so how we think about the problem, how we prioritize our risk management strategy, and how we spend to address our priorities, all important work that I think remains to be done. I think there's a role for industry there, a fairly significant one. We're going to cast as wide a net as we can, try to pick up a fairly robust, comprehensive effort, and we'll break it down into bite-sized pieces so that one aspect of the study feeds the next. As we identify problems, we'll get after action. You know, appoint a responsible agent against a fixed timeline. Action, 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 outcome driven. We've got to start to address it. And again, at the enterprise level is what I'm trying to get at. There's a couple other things that I think we will benefit from as a result of that, and there's sort of the hidden agenda here in terms of why do this. One is the natural information sharing that will take place. You know, there are pockets of excellence everywhere. I've been to the national labs, I've been to industry, as I mentioned. I've been out to our schools, been to 24th and watched our operations go. And, you know, great work being done, but there's no formal mechanism by which, you know, that information sharing is taking place. And where it comes to partnerships, that's where I think the greatest need is trying to figure out how do we formalize that process. Until we get everybody in the collective room together and have a discussion about an important aspect of our Air Force and our ability to fight the next fight, I'm not sure that we have really figured out how to formalize information sharing. I think if I go to, you know, sort of the Simon Sinek's and the Stephen Covey's and you know, sort of begin with the end in mind, or the start with why, and there's a number of other books out there that would, you know, sort of turn the discussion now to the why to do this. There's sort of a higher order piece, and it really goes back to a lot of the morning discussion, and frankly, certainly was mentioned a number of times by the Space Command commander, and that is this notion of thinking different. How do we do that? How do we turn an Air Force culture that is, as we've said, the best Air Force in the industrial age, to recognize that gap needs to be bridged now over into the information age, and you know, whether you call it the digital environment or the information. So I'd commend to you a book that I'm only halfway through, but it gets at it. It helps us understand. Daniel Burrus, Flash Foresight is the book, and it does a really good job of creating the case for doing this now, because in some cases we'd say you might be late. And I believe we are late, but you know, there's no better time to get started than now. He'd make the case that we are on the very leading edge of this revolution that's about to take place. And it's an order of magnitude discussion. And if you subscribe to that, what he's talking about, at least on the IT side, is, you know, logarithmic increases forthcoming in the areas of, you know, sort of digital processing power and bandwidth and storage, and that's going to continue to revolutionize. And so this is not a matter of inspiring change in our Air Force to get to where we should be today. This is transforming our Air Force in a way that looks at problems differently going forward. And, you know, I can, without talking too much out of school, I can tell you that I get to sit in the back benches in some of these meetings, and we have a discussion about, you know, where are the needs of the Air Force, and we tend to gravitate to what's comfortable, and so we want to have a discussion about the 6th Gen fighter. And, you know, how are we going to do that? What can we do with capabilities development to get after all of the gaps we recognize in air superiority? And if we do everything perfect in today's environment, we can move it forward from 2040 to 2033. And my guess is we'll be able to afford 2 of them, whatever they are, and we'll immediately put them into modification because Moore's Law has taken effect 7 times between now, when we conceived of that 6th Gen fighter, and the environment that exists at the time that it rolls off in 2033. This is the scope of the problem and the requirement to think differently. And so we kind of make light of it. I think everybody agrees, but what we have to do together is to transform our Air Force in a way that recognizes that the best Air Force in the industrial age doesn't get a pass in the information age, because a determined adversary has been watching for the last 20 years and plotting, and they're ready, should the conditions present, to really hold at risk our ability. And I don't think it's an exaggeration. I'll probably get, the heretic label here, but I don't think it's an exaggeration at all to say that this is potentially an existential threat to the United States Air Force, which is really hard to believe. For 32 years in my career, we've been on an up vector, and life is good, and we're doing good things today. Trust me, I mean, I was, my last assignment, I was sitting in Baghdad, Iraq, and was there when Mosul fell and things started to fall to hell in a handbasket pretty quick. And I was never so proud as any other time in my career as I was to be on the inside looking for the help and for the assistance, and to watch the US military jump into action when, frankly, other aspects of our government were not ready to do that. Fozzie Miller in 5th Fleet calls and says, I've got a carrier coming up the Gulf, and I get a call from folks in the KAOC, and they've got literally people in the cockpits of 130s at Ali Al Salim ready to come and get us. And there was a whole lot more that we delivered $250 million of stuff, Air Mobility Command, directly to the fight, watched it offload at Baghdad, and then promptly watched a lot of it go into the hands of the enemy when 90,000 soldiers disappeared. So the reason I'm going into that, a little bit of history, is to impress upon you that we're not thinking differently in a way that discounts all of the work that's being done and the importance of the effort today. It's clearly a building an airplane on the fly endeavor. We have got to recognize that there's a hot fight. It's going to go on for a long time. The nation depends on it. Our U.S. military, and in particular our U.S. Air Force, are winning the fight tonight in impressive ways. But we are in the industrial age, and we need to move to the information age, because that's the next fight. We don't know when it'll come, but that's what's in front of us. And I think increasingly, and I'm optimistic about this, increasingly we are coming to recognize and to appreciate that. So when I say think differently, what do I think? I think the coin of the realm is the data we collect. When I was at JP Morgan Chase, their chief of security and a team referenced a statement by their CEO, Jamie Dimon, and he basically says, really today, we are a technology company that happens to do financial transactions. Think of ourselves as an Air Force. We're a technology force that hoovers up information and can hold others at a risk as a result of how we take that information and fuse it at the decision point, as we talked about earlier. But we can do that a whole lot better if we have a more thoughtful approach to our data management strategy. How are we organizing that data so that we turn it into information and correlating that information and turning it into knowledge in a way that, with a little bit of commander sort of experience and knowledge and intent, we take that knowledge and we make better decisions faster, more effective to influence the outcome. That may be kinetic. It may be non-kinetic. It may just be a hearts and minds discussion, but how do we do that? That's what the nation needs us to be thinking, and there's a lot of work in front of us to get from that industrial age into the information age. It's basically taken the OODA loop that John Boyd talked about: observe, orient, decide, and act. Okay, it's reference for what's going on out there, provide situational awareness of the situation as it exists, and how things are morphing on in the battle space. Act in a way that influences in a direction that you want, and then, kind of repeat. It's that decision piece that we're trying to get at. I'm not saying that the OODA loop is going away. What I'm saying is very rapidly we're getting to the point that it's observe, act. And that time compression is challenging if we don't have a methodology by which to do it. Let me kind of go to the second so what, and then get to your questions if you have them for me. From my perspective, it's the other thing that Colonel John Boyd did for our Air Force that is much more impressive than the OODA loop that I just talked about. A lot of people don't know, but John Boyd was the architect, if you will, or the brains behind the ability to take an unstable fly-by-wire F-16 and figure out the algorithms that could keep it on the edge of the envelope at all times so that it was the best fighter at the time, and allow our aviators and Air Force to always operate on the technical edge, because he had learned to balance using basically a mission computer and an algorithm to balance speed with flexibility or maneuver. Too much of one, the airplane falls out of the sky. Too much of another, you've got all kinds of agility, but you're not responsive to the fight that you're in. And it's that ability to think through the problem and to really let the machine do its part that allows those pilots to be the best fighter pilots in the world in the industrial age. Now, to the so what, and Bob Allardyce and a number of senior mentors, because I've seen fit to borrow on the experience that's out here, some who have had my job, but others who just have a keen interest in getting this right. So when I ask questions and kind of talk through, so these lines of effort are intended to be the sum total of all the initiatives we're working. They all have a place, they all interrelate, and I think if we get there and are effective, we'll be better off when my time has come and passed and I'm moving on. And Bob, as he normally does, kind of gave me the so what? What's the so what here? We need to really understand what that is. So this is a half-baked answer to the so what in a personal way, because for me, now First Lieutenant Matthew Bender flies one of those F-16s. And we've given him 3 years of training to be successful in the next fight. And he's prepared to be a good wingman and to be successful. He's fired up, he loves what he's doing, and he's got the edge, and he believes in the machine. But what we have not trained him to do, or any of those pilots, is to be able to respond to a system or a system of systems that fail him. They don't go to his experience level, because somebody owns the avionics. Somebody takes the flight controls. Somebody hits the 0-hour button and takes a critical component away for navigation. You get the idea. I think that, to make it personal, we owe the future our best effort at working together and trying to figure this out. We owe the partnership that we talked about today and the effort to get after very serious problems against a determined enemy that is bound and determined to prevent us from being as successful as we have in the past going forward. And that's my so what. And I know that a lot of you share that perspective. This is important work to be done, and I look forward to your questions, and more importantly, working together to get some of the answers to the problems I've laid out in front of us as we go forward. So thank you, and ready to take questions if you have anything for me.
So if there are questions, if you could please stand. We've got mic handlers walking around. Or is it just too late in the day and we're done? Nope, there's one in the back.
I was told to stay on the stage, don't roam around. Yes.
Hi, Mike Quinn. One of the last things you talked about was time compression. If you could talk more about that, because of all the things I think you talked about today, it's very relevant. So the compelling events, the things that would prohibit time compression. Thank you.
Yeah, I think my perspective on time compression is first philosophy. Do we buy the argument that, as Daniel Burrus would lay out very articulately in his book, that this environment is going to continue to change, and he calls it transform. He said change is not fast enough for the requirements. It takes dramatic change. It's not an order of degrees. It's a constantly evolving, aggressive change required in all aspects of sort of what I talked about. So that's a philosophy. Do we agree with that or not? I think inside of that, this is the opportunity that exists for us if we can somehow design and this has taken great advantage of the technologies and the capabilities that are resonant in machine-to-machine and higher computing powers and all of that. But it's the data that if we put a time phasing to it, so I don't know what the meta-tagging required is. It may be the when and the where, but there's a time element that allows us to stay ahead of the requirement. And so that's what we're trying to work on with something called a decision support tool, which initially envisioned some 4 or 5 years ago was our effort to know where everything connected and to have a better perspective of where things, fit together. And so when it comes to programming decisions, at least knowing when you pull this plug because you decide to unfund it, what other lights go off? And, so it's a resource and capability discussion, but what's missing in that is the time phasing. And I think that if we get those 3 dynamics together, the capabilities we're talking about, the resources that we have, and a time phasing, that the overlapping area is what we would call strategic trade space. And it's really, I believe, potential anyhow, to help us in the decision area to understand at a level greater than we can today that helps us be ahead of a determined adversary.
Sir, John Maluta. Today is National Signing Day for college football. So many teams are going to try to get healthy. Within the cyber workforce, over the past few years, for various reasons, our bench may not be as strong as it was back when some of the folks who had your job were in it. You're the career field manager, the head guy, et cetera, et cetera. What does the future look like, and what steps are being taken to ensure that our force is prepared to take on those leadership roles?
John, that's a great question. it's great to see you here today, and thank you for bringing that up. And I do have some well-formed opinions. Let me start by saying that I'm a Buffalo Bills fan, and so I'm glad to know, and I'm going to run right upstairs to my room and try to find out who, again, this year will save us from the agony of defeat. Yeah, I totally agree. It was one of the first things that I kind of observed of this career field, where you have tremendous talent. There's no shortage of talent. Ed Wilson has superstars working for him. Cybercom has superstars working. And in fact, every installation has a capable, innovative, too small, too under-resourced, but group of people who are making amazing things happen. I spent some time just a week and a half ago down at JSOC J6, and what I would say is, in terms of the tactical comms piece and the ability to affect the warfight, that's the stretch goal. If you could imagine an environment in which nothing happens without the integration of the 6 with the 2, the 3, the 5, it is a team event, and every airman is a multitasker. So if you ask them to, do work on a radar or lay some cable or drop in a network, it's a multitasking sort of organization. And at the lowest level, it's the stretch goal for this community as we try to transform ourselves. When you talk bench strength, you start to get up into the 05, 06 area, and again, tremendous talent, but a serious concern from my perspective that we don't give ourselves the credit that we deserve, and we haven't used a much broader perspective. Go wide, go out to the Air Force, and take credit for the good work we're doing out in the combatant commands. There's no reason in the world we shouldn't have the preponderance of the air base wings at the wing command level, and just a different perspective, one that spends time and effort and focus on getting outside of our community and letting commanders know and understand the critical capabilities that we provide and the innovation and the ability to see problems through. I may not have mentioned in this cyber task force this notion of focused on the 5 core missions for the Air Force. And the idea is that the preponderance of the force in the future really is focused not on the pointy end stuff and the non-kinetic effects, but instead on assuring our mission in any environment. And so increasingly, the environment, I believe, gets to the point where we add value at the installation layer, but we first have to embrace these concepts ourselves. When you get to the next level up and it's getting our folks promoted, it's critically important to get them out to the Air Force, to have a different perspective of what we value as a service and what skills and experiences we're building into our workforce. I just don't think we've had the discussion enough to make that transformation. But I can tell you at the end of the day, there's a problem, and it's why you asked the question. And I talked to a good number of the 6s, the MAJCOM 6s today, and shared exactly that we together as a community need to relook this problem and do it in a hurry. I will work with General Hyten and others to look through how are we managing at the senior level to provide opportunities so that we can develop more leaders for the future. We got a problem today, but I don't think it's insurmountable. I think it's just been maybe a lack of overall focus. Does that try to answer it? Okay. Yes, sir.
Sir, thank you. Ted Trushanicki from IBM. Can you provide, or may you provide me your perspective on knowledge sharing, knowledge management, knowledge operations? And let me give you context for that. My observation in my interaction with folks in the Air Force is knowledge management really equates to document management, how to manage that information. What I see missing is the capturing of institutional knowledge by humans and keeping that information in repositories so it can be mined, so it can be shared, et cetera. More of a, as I call it, a non-real-time collaborative environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think your observations are fair. Completely agree. For too long, we looked at knowledge management as almost an administrative function. And I know from being a high-time user of that in terms of a 5-time commander, I didn't always understand what my knowledge managers were doing for the organization in a way that I should have been smarter about and leveraging. You know, I think our service finds ourselves in a net deficit as we go forward. I think it starts with, you know, sort of this cognitive model with the focus on knowledge and thinking through the piece parts of that. It's the data and how we organize it and the information, how we correlate, and what do we call knowledge and what do we do with it. So there's a lot of work in front of us there. I acknowledge, you know, sort of your observations as being accurate as to where we are today. And I think that there's, broadly speaking, a recognition that the Air Force will benefit when we do a better job of you know, that whole spectrum going forward.
Perhaps one more question.
Hi, General Michael Miller, Booz Allen, over here, sir.
Oh, okay. Yep, thanks.
So you alluded to it earlier, the acquisition process is pretty much hard broken. I don't know that we'd find too many people to disagree with that. As the person in the room with perhaps some of the most positional wherewithal, what have you done and what can you do to fix this problem of the Air Force spending hundreds of millions on systems that have been unsupportable for years, spending hundreds of millions on systems that are completely indefensible because the requirements and the threat have changed so dramatically, and just basically not having an acquisition system that is capable of keeping up with that evolving threat, evolving operation? What do you plan on doing? What can you do? And how is it that we can help you?
Okay. Thanks for the question. I mean, I think, again, acknowledge everything you had to say. And so, you know, a couple of days ago, when I have this discussion with the Chief of Staff, I said, we just got to figure out how to do this better. There is a cost of doing business and an implied requirement for accountability in a way that we haven't done. It's sort of an interrelationship between some of the CIO discussion I said and the responsibilities for an enterprise view. And I don't think there's any area that is more ripe for change than, as you just described, the IT. So there's a couple of specific things that we're trying to do. And I'm frankly grappling with it, and what you can do to help is, if you've had this experience, help us through it in terms of lessons learned and ideas on how to do it. So one, data center consolidation is a part of JIE. I mean, it's hundreds of millions in savings possible, but to be very frank, when we look to get an accountability so that we can get on with it, this is a huge difference between us and industry. So Goldman Sachs goes from 700 plus data centers down to something south of 40, and they do it in a 2-year period, and they save literally billions of dollars in the process that is just pumping out the back in energy and improve efficiencies and everything else. The Air Force, and I can only speak for my service, but I can only imagine that it's worse with the Army, and I can describe why. I went to Army War College, plus they just had 12 years of funding out the wazoo, and so money glosses over a lot of problems. So accountability for data centers. come in, I ask the question, where are we with data center consolidation? I know there's a DoD policy that's directing us to do that. Where are we as an Air Force? We have no idea. We stopped counting at 400. And we literally have a small contract out there someplace, I don't know if we're still doing this, but that was what I was led to believe, that are walking around the every installation, opening up closets and trying to figure out what they've got in there. We haven't defined a data center for them necessarily in a usable way, and so we're out there in discovery mode. My proposal and what I'm working to try to get better definition of is whether it's snapping the chalk line and just accepting the fact that we will never uncover where all of them are, or maybe a use case that helps us frame a measurement in some way that helps us get the analysis behind it from which we can extrapolate and make decisions at the corporate level to just get on with it. But knowing that there are savings to be had. So I'm not sure how we do that, but we definitely need to do something different. And my thoughts are that others have been through it. We need to emulate that and figure out exactly the procedure we have to go to. This is important in another way when it comes to data centers, because when we rationalize our applications and potentially have the same problem where we have no accountability for them, I would say that the users are in the best position. The ones who depend on those applications, or the ones that used to depend on them and no longer use them, but we just don't know that. If I incentivize them to kind of shut those applications down and then centrally manage them going forward, big cost savings available to us, I have to have some place for them to go. And so it's the critical nature of the, sort of getting on with JIE in those areas that can support that. A second approach to this, and I talked to somebody earlier today about trying to find out how to change the thinking of how we do this. So JIE, General Hyten may have mentioned, is not a program of record. And so I'm constantly having to go after funds in year of execution, and the only arrows I have in my quiver are good looks and the power of persuasion. And fortunately, we're well placed for that effort, but it's not what I would recommend, especially to some of my other CIO brothers. But we have to do things different. And so, program of record for JIE going forward starting in 17. That gives us 2 years where we have to kind of belly up and fight for the unfundeds. But I think we can do better than that, and we're going to lay in front of the corporate process. This is a compelling need. Everything is predicated on it, and I need the seed money to save you in the long run. And I got acknowledgement by the chief that he would support that kind of approach. And I think that the environment is ripe for it. I think that there's acknowledgement that we can't keep doing business as usual. The secretary, the chief, they asked for bold leadership. I'm going to step up and ask for a different perspective on how we do this. That gets at a couple of things that we're doing to try to get after it. The acquisition process is an enigma to me. I think that we are completely and totally in G at this point with the acquirers out there and the community that plans that. I think they recognize the problem they have for a long time, and they're trying mightily to bring things around to a responsive system.
General Bender, it's been an honor to have you with us, sir. And on behalf of the Rocky Mountain chapter of FCA, we thank you for coming and being part of our symposium.
Okay, thanks very much.
Sir.
Thanks, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps it up for today. The exhibit hall will remain open for another hour and 3 minutes and 24 seconds. So please take your time in departing. Be safe tonight in whatever you choose to do. And we'll see you back tomorrow, 7:30 in the morning, for our continental breakfast sponsored by GTRI. Thank you and good night.